Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give it a few minutes for other people to join before we begin the workshop. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we have enough people. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for waiting. Welcome to the 2026 MHP Gap Funding NOFA workshop. My name is Mona Akbar, and I will go over a few items before we start the presentation. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda for today. We will give you an overview of each of these sections from the NOFA and open it up for Q&A in the end. We expect the webinar to last for about an hour and a half. So this presentation is being recorded. Closed captioning is available through your browser settings. No outside AI recording is allowed. For any technical assistance, please notify us in the chat so we can assist you immediately. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but you can add your questions to the Q&A chat window as we are presenting. Please do include your full name and the organization you're with. You can also email us any questions. We will go over the details of emailing us towards the end. Okay, I'd like to introduce the MFSN leadership team, as well as other team members that will talk about the NOFA today. Again, my name is Mona Akbar, and I am one of the specialists in the MFSN branch with Kenneth Turner and Zachary MacArthur. Joining us today is our branch chief, Melissa Hardy-Swaley, Stephanie Matters, our section chief, and our program managers, Eddie Fairchild and Kimberly Laws. Also presenting today will be Roy Pasha, Dylan Harvey, and Donna Scott, who is our expert in handling all your email inquiries. I will now hand it over to Melissa, our branch chief, for some opening remarks before we begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Good morning and welcome to our 2026 MHP GAP NOFA workshop. We are very excited to introduce you to our first ever MHP multifamily housing program, GAP Funding NOFA. The purpose of this MHP GAP Funding NOFA is to support construction-ready projects that, despite having an existing HCD loan or grant commitment, are unable to move forward. This NOFA will provide critical investment in advancing previously awarded HCD projects to the finish line, providing much-needed housing for communities across California. Approximately $240 million is made available through this NOFA for projects that have an existing HCD award from a qualifying HCD multifamily program. Those projects cannot have begun construction and must commit to applying to the third round of the SIDLAC TCAC bond 4% and 4% tax credit on September 8th with no state tax credit ask. Let's take a quick step back. You're probably wondering what makes this NOFA exciting. Well, our application has been streamlined and our document checklist has been minimized. We have enhanced our scoring model based on adjusted restricted units with the new minimum and maximum scores. And we've added some new tabs to our Excel workbook. Now, let's talk a little bit about what you'll learn today. The who, what, when, and how. Who is eligible? What are the NOFA requirements? When is the deadline to apply? And how do you submit your application? This is just the tip of the iceberg. My team will dive into the details with you throughout this workshop. Again, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague and program manager, Eddie Fairchild.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to walk us through overview, eligibility, and timeline. This NOFA is intended to support construction-ready affordable housing projects that already have existing funding, HCD funding awards, but are unable to move forward due to a remaining funding gap. Unlike prior multifamily finance super NOFA rounds, this NOFA is specifically focused on projects the state has already invested in that now need additional gap financing to proceed to construction. The purpose of this funding is to close financing gaps, advance stalled projects, maximize prior public investment, and accelerate projects into construction. Another key difference in this NOFA is the streamlined application and review process. Previously approved documents and conditions associated with existing HCD awards generally will not be re-reviewed, which is intended to support a faster award timeline and help projects move more quickly toward construction. Eligible projects must demonstrate readiness to proceed and commit to applying to the next 4% CDLAC and TCAC funding cycle. Overall, this NOFA is designed to provide projects with momentum and predictability as they pursue remaining financing sources and move toward housing delivery throughout California. To be eligible under this NOFA, projects must already be substantially financed and construction ready, with the exception of the remaining gap financing request and anticipated 4% bond and tax credit financing. One of the key distinctions in this NOFA compared to prior funding rounds is that the department is specifically targeting projects that have already received an HCD award but are unable to proceed due to changes in financing conditions or remaining funding gaps. Projects also must not have started construction at the time of application. This funding is intended to support projects that are prepared to move forward quickly once remaining financing is secured. Applicants must have an active, qualifying, non-expired HCD award. For projects whose first and only HCD award was received in 2025, the original application must have included either 4% state tax credits or 9% tax credit financing, unless otherwise exempted under the NOFA requirements. Overall, the department's goal is to prioritize projects which demonstrate readiness and a clear path to construction. This slide highlights several additional eligibility considerations applicants should be aware of. First, traditional stacking limits are not acceptable under this NOFA. This reflects the department's recognition that many otherwise viable projects are experiencing unique financing challenges and may require additional subsidy layering to proceed to construction. Second, while projects may request additional gap funding through this NOFA, existing financing commitments are expected to remain in place. The intent of this program is to supplement, not replace, committed financing sources. Applicants should also carefully review Article 2 of the NOFA for complete eligibility requirements related to both applicants and projects, including program-specific conditions and exclusions. As part of this NOFA, applicants are required to commit to applying to CDLAC and TCAC's 4% 2026 funding round on September 8th, 2026. Projects must apply without requesting state tax credits. This is an important distinction in the 2026 MHP gap funding NOFA. The department designed this funding opportunity to help projects bridge remaining financing gaps and position themselves competitively for the next available bond and tax credit cycle. The intent is to provide projects with enough funding certainty and momentum to successfully secure remaining permanent financing and proceed to construction as quickly as possible. Applicants should carefully consider these commitments before applying, as continued funding is contingent upon meeting NOFA requirements and program timelines. Under this NOFA, the maximum award amount is $15 million, and the minimum award amount is $3 million. If more than min or max requested, please email the department by June 1st, 2026 to request an exception. In addition, total HCD funding generally may not exceed 60% of the project's total development costs. Applicants should be aware that cost efficiency remains an important scoring consideration under this NOFA. Projects with lower costs per restricted units may score more competitively, while projects with costs above $250,000 per restricted unit will not receive points in that scoring category. One important distinction in this NOFA is that the department may allow projects to exceed prior per unit and project limits under certain circumstances. This reflects the department's recognition of current financing conditions and the increased funding needs many projects are experiencing statewide. Please email us by June 1st, 2026 to request an exception. Overall, the intent is to balance flexibility for stalled projects while still encouraging reasonable development costs and efficient use of public funds. Under this NOFA, the department intends to award approximately 10% of total MHP funds to projects located in rural areas. This target reflects consideration of the level of MHP funds awarded to rural areas, multi-family finance supernova funding rounds, and supports continued investment in housing opportunities across diverse geographic regions throughout California. Applicants should also note that this NOFA does not include a separate senior housing set-aside. The department determined that prior funding rounds had already sufficiently addressed senior housing set-aside goals. One notable aspect of this NOFA is the focused approach toward advancing existing projects that are closest to construction readiness, while still maintaining consideration of geographic funding distribution throughout the state. This slide outlines the key dates associated with the 2026 MHP GAP funding NOFA. Applicants should pay close attention to all deadlines, particularly the application due date and subsequent CDLAC TCAC application requirements. The NOFA was released on April 20th, 2026, with applications and the Multifamily Finance Supernova portal opening on May 4th, 2026. Applicants requesting exceptions should submit those requests to the department by June 1st, 2026. This deadline is intended to provide sufficient time for the department to review and process requests prior to the application due date. Applicants are encouraged to submit requests as early as possible. Applications are due June 5th, 2026 at 4 p.m. Pacific time. The department anticipates announcing awards in August 2026. One of the notable features of this NOFA is the expedited review timeline, which is intended to help construction-ready projects move more quickly towards securing remaining financing and starting construction. Applicants are encouraged to begin preparing materials early, particularly documentation related to financing commitments, readiness to proceed, and coordination with upcoming CDLAC and TCAC application cycles. Although this NOFA includes a streamlined application and review process, awardees remain responsible for complying with all applicable state and federal laws, regulations, and program requirements. This includes compliance with requirements outlined in MHP Guidelines Section 7314, as well as applicable relocation requirements and California's Preservation Notice Law, where applicable. One important point to emphasize is that the streamlined review process under this NOFA does not waive ongoing regulatory or compliance obligations. Projects are still expected to meet all applicable legal and programmatic requirements associated with their existing HCD awards and any new funding awarded through this NOFA. With that, I'll hand it over to Dylan to walk through the next section in more detail.
Thank you, Eddie. Next slide, please. This section highlights key updates and enhancements made to the application, including updates to the document checklist and the addition of 2 new tabs, application certifications and gap eligibility. We reduced the document upload checklist from 116 possible attachments down to just 10, making the application much simpler and more efficient to complete. The Application Certifications tab is intended to further streamline the process. Sponsors and applicants can now certify the key requirements outlined in the NOFA. Rather than providing separate documentation up front, all items on this tab should be certified as yes. Any no's will be highlighted in red and would signal that your application isn't eligible. Gap eligibility. What is this and what is the purpose? This will be a new tab on the application for this round. Please do not panic. The applicant will not need to make any entries on this tab. Its purpose is to provide a high-level eligibility review by calculating the project's funding gap and comparing it against MFSN's funding limit requirements. It assists applicants in identifying whether a project may meet minimum NOFA funding parameters prior to full underwriting review, and automatically evaluates key funding limit tests using information entered throughout the application workbook. There are instructions on this tab. To have this sheet function properly, please follow these instructions. The gap eligibility fields are auto-populated based on entries in the Development Budget and Development Sources tab. These tabs will need to be filled out prior to this calculation. All development sources must be marked as committed in order to calculate the MHP gap request. The calculated funding gap is validated using NOFA funding limits to determine if the gap meets minimum eligibility requirements. The attached example is a project with a funding gap exceeding $7 million. Once calculated, the gap is automatically evaluated against the applicable NOFA funding limit parameters, including the minimum award amount, maximum award amount, and the HCD funding 60% funding test. If all funding parameters meet the minimum requirements, the applicable fields will display in green, much like the example pictured, and the MHP gap request will be treated as a committed source within the Development Sources tab and included in the permanent financing total. If any parameter does not meet the required threshold, the applicable fields will display in red, indicating the project does not currently meet one or more eligibility requirements. With that, I'll hand it over to Kimberly Laws, who will walk through the next section of the presentation.
Thank you, Dylan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Laws. I'll be going over the NOFA. This summary does not represent the full scope of the NOFA and program requirements. Applicants are responsible for reviewing the complete MHP guidelines dated February 13th, 2025, which can be found on our website. The first program requirement is eligible project. Projects may include new construction, rehabilitation, or the conversion of non-residential structure to a rental housing development. The project must consist of at least 5 units, and construction must not have begun. The project location must be suitable for and meet the needs of the intended tenants. These requirements are outlined in the MHP Guidelines, Section 7302. Additionally, the department expects the unit mix to remain substantially the same as what was approved in your most recent award. That includes the total number of units, bedroom sizes, and AMI levels. Next, we have eligible sponsor applicants. Applying for the MHP funding under this NOFA must include all sponsors associated with the existing HCD award. Applicants must meet the requirements as outlined in the MHP guidelines. If your existing HCD award is funded through a federal program and the sponsor is a subrecipient of an HCD commitment to a local jurisdiction, please contact the department staff at the SuperNOFA mailbox no later than June 1st, 2026, prior to the application deadline of June 5th, 2026, to consult how this requirement applies to your specific project. Please be prepared to provide full details of each federally funded project, along with contract numbers, who the award was granted to, and specific information which could potentially include sending in documents. As shown on this slide, applicants must confirm, using our streamlined process, that their project fits within one of the eligible MHP project types listed above. Next, we have eligible uses of funds and project costs. Funds can only be used for approved project costs. All expenses must align with the eligible cost categories outlined in the MHP Guidelines section 7304. This section provides detailed guidance on what is considered an allowable use of funds, so applicants should review it carefully to ensure that their proposed use of funds meets program requirements before submitting your application. For site control, the review process has been streamlined. You will be required to certify that site control has been maintained since the original HCD award. Pay close attention to the application checklist if site control has been modified or extended. You must submit updated documentation. Be sure to include a summary explanation of the site control. To meet threshold, applicants must satisfy all three requirements listed. 1, eligible projects must meet the MHP guidelines, section 7303.1. An eligible project must certify through our streamlined process that they meet these guidelines. 2, applications must achieve a point score greater than 55.0 points. To clarify, greater than 55.0 points is anything above 55.0, meaning 55.05 points are acceptable. And 3, applications must achieve 20 points in the readiness to proceed category. We will dive deeper into the scoring details in the scoring criteria section coming up. For my final slide, we have scoring and ranking. Applications that meet NOFA, threshold requirements, and the minimum self-score will move forward and be evaluated using the criteria outlined in Article 4 scoring criteria. Keep in mind, incomplete or low self-scoring applications may not receive a full review. This slide also gives a quick snapshot of how the ranking process works, and if you want the full breakdown, be sure to check out Article 2F of this NOFA. That wraps up my portion of the program requirements. Thank you for sticking with me. Let's keep the momentum going as I turn it over to Kenneth Turner.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, and thank you for all of you for attending today. My name is Kenneth Turner, and I'll be discussing the application submission and review process. If we have not already made it clear, the gap funding NOFA was designed to simplify the application process as a result of projects already having HCD awards. The goal is to reduce redundancy while ensuring that the department receives current and accurate information. Applications must be submitted electronically through the MFSN portal no later than 4 p.m. Pacific time on June 5th. We anticipate announcing awards in early August. Given that all applicants for this NOFA have existing HCD awards and as a result have previously documented compliance with certain UMR and MHP guideline requirements, this NOFA permits applicants to self-certify via the self-certification tab as described in the application and as discussed previously. If no changes have been made to the following items, sponsor certification is acceptable. Sponsor applicant experience and capacity, org docs, site control, local improvement, local approvals and entitlements, environmental clearances and reports, and market studies. Underwriting, also known as feasibility, will focus primarily on verifying the debt service coverage ratio requirement and demonstration of positive cash flow for 15 years. To accurately assess scoring, financing, and underwriting requirements, the Excel application workbook will include the following tabs, which must be completed with current updated information: the unit mix, the development sources and uses, the development budget tab, the operating budget tab, and the cash flow. We're looking for current information in those tabs. As featured earlier in the presentation, the application checklist tab within the workbook is consistent with the streamlined approach of the GAP NOFA. Required documentation for application review has been significantly reduced to avoid redundancy and duplicative review of items that we've already deemed compliant with the previous HCD awards. Please note, there are external web links within the checklist that have been provided to assist applicants in submitting complete and accurate information. Items required to apply at the time of submission are the application submission notification, the rural status determination, if applicable, the certification and legal status, any updated site control documents, the preliminary title report dated within 30 days of application, any permanent EFCs, and any subsidies related to the project. The MHP GAP NOFA applications are to be submitted in the SuperNOFA application portal known as SNAP through ServiceNow. You'll find a link to ServiceNow on the HCD SuperNOFA website by clicking Apply Now. You can also find a link to the application submission portal within the Instructions tab of the application workbook. If you have previously submitted HCD applications using the ServiceNow portal, you will be prompted to enter your existing username and password. However, if this is your first time using the ServiceNow portal, you'll click on the register in the top right corner to create a new username and password. When completing the tabs in the portal, please take note that all fields with a red asterisk are required fields. You'll need to enter information in those fields with the red asterisk to complete your application submission. You will not be able to proceed until all required fields are completed. Once logged into the application portal, the Attachments tab identifies documents that are required for submission. These required documents are identified by a red asterisk. A document checklist previously discussed within the application also identifies documents required to be submitted. Please note, JPEG files must be submitted last or separately in order to submit a complete application. The portal will generate and send an email 48 hours prior to the application due date that will alert users if their application is still in draft mode and has not yet been submitted. Please note, and it's very important, that your application has not been successfully submitted if you do not receive a confirmation email from the portal. This includes my part on application submission. I'll now hand it off to Roy to discuss scoring.
Thanks, Kenny. Hello, everyone. My name is Roy Pasia, and I will be discussing the scoring criteria for this NOFA. The scoring criteria chart provides a summary of the maximum points achievable in each category. For the lowest income levels and cost containment categories, these scoring categories have been consistent for all prior MFSN funding rounds. So for sake of time, we won't elaborate on those, but please know that they both auto-populate scores based on data entered in the application. For details on these calculations, please reference the NOFA. For this presentation, we will focus on funding priorities and readiness to proceed, as these categories are unique to this NOFA. Points, next is funding priorities. Points will be based on the amount of funding requested in this NOFA divided by the number of units restricted at 80% AMI or below, adjusted for bedroom count. Projects that request fewer dollars per adjusted unit will receive more points, up to a maximum of 20, while projects requesting $250,000 or more per unit will receive 0 points. To calculate the adjusted restricted units, multiply the number of restricted units for each bedroom type by adjustment factors you see in the table. This table is also in the NOFA and is incorporated within the application. Let's look at a hypothetical example to show how the score is calculated. In this example, we have a 112 unit project with a 15 million funding gap. First, apply the adjustment factors to the 112 units to get 130.2 adjusted restricted units. Then divide the 15 million by 130.2 to get a cost of $115,207 per adjusted restricted unit. Next, divide that cost by the 250,000 cap to get 0.4608. Multiply that figure by 19.9 to get 9.2120. Subtract that from 20 to get the final score, 10.7880 points. More simply, turn the cost per adjusted unit into a fraction of 250,000. Multiply that fraction by 19.9 to calculate the points you subtract. Subtract from 20 to get your score. Next, we move to readiness to proceed. This is a 20-point category, and to be eligible for funding, you must receive full points. Please note, there are no opportunities for partial points in this category. To receive points, you must have EFCs for all pertinent financing, including commitments for project-based rental assistance and operating subsidies, and a commitment to begin construction. The parameters for the commitment to begin construction will depend on your project type. For projects using tax credits, applicants must commit to applying in the next SIDLAC and TCAC funding round no later than September 8th, 2026. For bond financing and 4% federal tax credits with no state tax credit request, and must meet all SIDLAC bond issuance and construction closing deadlines. For non-tax credit projects, which is less common, applicants must commit to starting construction within 180 days of award and submitting all required documentation within that 180-day window. Please make sure to read the NOFA for full details. The last piece of the scoring criteria is the tiebreaker, and for this NOFA, there isn't one. The funding priorities point score formula eliminates the need for a tiebreaker, and individual point scores will be carried out to the decimal place necessary to obtain different scores. And that concludes the scoring criteria portion. I will now turn it over to Donna, who will go over the technical support aspect of this NOFA.
Donna, you're on mute.
My apologies, folks. Hello, my name is Donna, and I am part of the MFSN Support NOFA Inbox Technical Support Team, along with Jamie and Megan. Our team serves as a central resource to support you as you work through the 2026 MFSN GAP NOFA process, whether that's application technical issues, application documentation submission inquiries, program guidelines, or even the NOFA itself. And while those are the most common areas, we are here to support a broad range of inquiries to help you navigate the process. Our website is the primary resource as you work through the application, and we strongly recommend folks review the NOFA and guidelines thoroughly. As the front door to MFSN, we also assist with general navigation of the application processes and materials, which we know are crucial to you as you move through this phase. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide project-specific guidance or strategy, as all applications must go through the formal review process. Our role is to provide clear, consistent, and policy-aligned information so you can move forward with a strong understanding of the requirements. We aim to respond in 3 to 5 business days. For more complex inquiries, we require additional research and response times may be longer. In those cases, we'll follow up, we will communicate status, and we will provide an expected timeline and stay in communications with you. If we need clarification, we will reach out directly and ensure that we are providing the most accurate response. Please note, duplicate inquiries may slow down the response times. The more detail, the better. So by providing more detail in your inquiry, especially referencing specific sections of the guidelines or materials, help us respond efficiently and accurately within the possible timeframes. So for technical issues with application workbook, the Excel itself, please include application workbook and portal support in the subject line. Keep in mind, application workbook and portal support teams cannot provide assistance with program guidelines or inquiries regarding processes. For those which are program support guidelines, UMRs, application materials, please include the exact guideline or requirement in the subject line. This speeds up things for us significantly. As mentioned earlier in the webinar, applicants that are requesting exceptions to exceed the 15 million or the ask is below the 3 million must request this approval. Requests must be sent to the department before June 1st. This deadline is intended to provide sufficient time for the department to review and process requests prior to the application due date. Applicants are encouraged to submit these requests as early as possible. Timing is everything, so allow yourself time to get your inquiry addressed before the application portal closes on June 5th at 4 p.m. as the inbox staff will not be able to assist as applications will be under review at that time. Another great way to get a speedy reply from the inbox is to send baked goods. Cookies, pies, cakes are welcome. Also, when submitting an application via the portal, please make sure you complete the final submission step. And I know you've heard this already, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat it. You must click submit. If you do not receive that confirmation email, we strongly recommend that you return to the portal and verify your submission, as that email is the only way to confirm it was successfully received. And again, we strongly encourage you to utilize the SuperNOFA inbox as a resource. We are here to support you through the process, and we can be addressed at supernofa@hcd.ca.gov. And before we move any further, I just want to ask, we're at the end of our presentation. So before we go to the Q&A session, I'm going to ask if we can go ahead and stop recording at this time. A huge thank